Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Niche Cast. I am always and have always been the Diggity Doodah Doc, aka Mr. Big Chili, aka one leg longer than the other, simmering away in the South Island, here to talk some Blackcaps versus Bangladesh ODI cricket with the Niche Case comrade El Wildcardo and Mr. El Wildcardo. I am here in Kaikoura and the avocados are awfully expensive due to the standard summer shortage. So I was just wondering how those avocados on your avocado tree are looking up there in big old Whangarei.
Well, starting to ripen, very, very much the end of the season. They're in dire need of being picked, actually, because if I don't get through too many of them in the coming weeks, going to start to inhibit next year's growth. So, bit of a priority. You can't get enough avocados, and I've got a few too many. What do you know?
I'd happily take a couple off you if there was a logistical way to fire them down to
New
the
Zealand
South
Post?
Island.
We've
where it's
fit
been
one in an envelope.
I don't understand because it's been like bloody sunny. It's only rained a couple of days, but the avocado tree is just not. I don't think it's hot enough, like in the daytime and the nighttime, to get those avocados firing on all cylinders down in the South Island.
Nah, not in Kaikoura. I think in like Nelson region you can grow them a bit, sort of like. Oh, I don't know actually. Maybe. Yeah, I don't. They actually struggle to grow quite well, but at all below below Northland apparently. There is I think Mulberry can get some, but I guess this is why we have a bit of a shortage, eh? But they do say that we got quality avocados in New Zealand, so.
And one day there will be a Niche Case avocado adventure going down somewhere up in the naughty Northland wildcard.
Yeah, we'll sort it out.
You hit me up with a link, and before we get into our standard cricket discussion in the peak summer conditions that we are in, you sent me a link. Denzel Curry from Miami, Florida, performing a cover of Rage Against the Machine. I believe it was out of Australia. It was Triple J.
It was.
So that's out of Australia. So I assume his band that he was performing with were Australian.
Just local battlers.
Local battlers
living the dream.
Pretending to be Tom Morello on the wah-wah pedal.
Yeah, well, you notice he didn't do the solo, eh? Although that was the best part of the song, though. Instead of doing the Tom Morello solo, the old mate just chucked in a verse from his last album. Yeah. So that's that. Well, that's the best thing about covers, isn't it? That you can, especially if you are classic pub cover band, they're not going to have the skill or creative nous to be able to add that little bit of pizzazz into the song. But if you've got a true blue artist like Denzel Curry, he's going to add that twist onto the song. I will say though, me personally, Bulls on Parade isn't my favourite Rage Against the Machine song. Probably not in my top 3 either. There's a fairly obvious number 1 song, and that is Renegade of Funk. Like anyone, you would appreciate that wildcard, knowing that my love of funk. Sure,
so
of course.
Renegades of Funk just hits me in the heart. And then the other song I really like is Guerrilla Radio, and that's because it was on the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 soundtrack that I used to play on computer. So just a little tangent there. What did you really like about that Denzel Curry performance? Why did it hit the spot for you on so many levels?
Mate, sheer passion, wasn't it? Just I just love the way he sold it. The starting off in a bit of a crouch, basically just pouncing up to his feet once he kicked into it. Absolute I don't want to say insanity because that makes it sound like he was just off the hinges. It was just perfectly controlled aggression, right on the fringes from him, all the way through. Chucked in his own touch with a the verse from, I think it's from Sirens from his last album, which, by the way, quality album. It was one of my favorite hip hop records from last year for sure. I remember cutting down towards my top 10 when I did my list. He was there. I think I had one extra spot in the top 10, and it was going to be between him, JID, and the Brockhampton album, and I went with Brockhampton instead. But yeah, close. Oh mate, it was fiery, wasn't it? What about yourself? What did you find from it? On top of the sheer passion, the sheer incendiary delivery of the whole thing.
I think it's all just encapsulated in the fact that he is probably the best person to do the Zack De La Rocca role.
Yes. Sometimes you get a cover song which is just a perfect, it's like that song was almost written for them rather than the original.
Yeah, I can't think of any rapper around at the moment who can fulfill that with this, as you said, the passion and the energy as Zack De La Rocca performed with, and the same...
But his voice held up too.
The same kind of background as well. Like Denzel Curry isn't coming out with your kind of sugarcane hip hop. He's not coming out with messages of, shaking asses and all of that stuff. He's coming out with some hard hitting material, but also in a very unique delivery, which aligns with how Zack De La Rocca performed for Rage Against the Machine. So it was kind of a match made in heaven, really.
I've been noticing a little bit of a trend lately between a lot of, it's not some, well, maybe it is just across the board. I was going to say it's more like sort of indie type rappers, but I don't think that's true. It's just there's like a generation coming through where there's touchstones beyond just like the hip hop they grew up with, and hip hop's the one of the great things about that as a genre is that it's always been, like certain other like classic musical genres are similar, that it's always been like a rebellious thing. And so once you get to the point where hip-hop's had a whole generation of being mainstream, now you're getting dudes coming through and just drawing from like weird influences. And I'm seeing a bit of this this old... It's like that, 90s grunge and sort of punk influence, like a real kind of rock thing to a lot of these dudes. Like Denzel Curry had that... he had a song called Clout Cobain on his last album, which was a great song too. You had Vince Staples with his Summertime '06, wasn't it? That album, the cover of it is basically like a variation of an old Joy Division cover. Like I reckon we're starting to see a little bit of this. That particular kind of there's an attitude in that music and this music which correlates. I reckon we're seeing an influence there coming through, which I'm noticing a little bit more and more. Kurt Cobain especially seems to be a big touchstone for a lot of young rappers in a funny way.
What is most notable about that idea, and you've seen it in kind of your exposure to the hip-hop scene, and then for me just being exposed to a far broader range of hip-hop artists, all the artists that even younger than us, as we near our late 20s, all those quote-unquote SoundCloud rappers and that type of generation, they are far more influenced by the pop rock of the early 2000s, the metal of the 90s, and all that type of music. They might not have the same like alternative influences, but it's the same idea of them being influenced by non-hip-hop artists and bringing that into their perception of what hip-hop is. And I just believe it's all because hip-hop is the biggest musical genre in the world, bar none. Like, the hip-hop is modern music at this point in time, and so if a musical genre is at the level that hip-hop is at, it's going to have a whole wide range of different influences in how we absorb that music today. So it's a very interesting idea, but we might check back on that one later on, because we've had a weird old series between the Blackcaps and Bangladesh, and I think that was the last ODI, last official ODI maybe. I think They play a couple of warm-up games, and there's also games against Australia ahead of the World Cup. I just don't know if they are official ODI status or if they will be first-class status. I have kind of run myself in circles writing about this Blackcaps ODI series and permutations, different meanings, performances of players. So I wouldn't say I'm a bit over it. I'm just a bit over my own ideas and a bit over my own thoughts and ideas about this Blackcaps team and various players. So I want to get your general perception, any individuals that you are really thinking about right now. Kind of headlined by Todd Astle. Like after that first ODI, we had a little discussion about Todd Astle not playing the first ODI despite being selected to have an opportunity. I don't really like Todd Astle as a cricketer. Like as in terms of, I don't believe he's among the 11 best cricketers in any format in New Zealand. But ahead of a World Cup, he deserves a chance to state his case. That's why he was selected, and Todd Astle ended up playing one ODI of 3. And it's a very weird situation, kind of summed up by that, or perhaps summed up by the fact that Tim Southee just came back and took 6 wickets in the last ODI. Holy shit! Wildcard. What do you reckon? What are your thoughts on the team, the selection, individuals? How are you thinking about this Blackcaps unit right now as we are, I think, Test Match Special BBC podcast, their most recent episode prior to the West Indies playing England was 100 days out from the World Cup. So I think now we're probably at like 98 or 97 days out from the World Cup. How you feeling?
Pretty confused in a couple major areas. I mean, the whole thing about the squad selection has got to the point where it's almost anyone's guess. And as you said, Todd Astle coming in, give him a chance to state his claim. Don't pick him in 2 of the 3 games. I mean, I don't know that does anyone any favours, and I'm skeptical if he wasn't considered among the best 11 for any of those games, even though, let's be honest, they didn't need to be picking their best 11, and I reiterate what I said last week, which is that if you want to test out your bowlers, don't pick Trent Boult, because Trent Boult just comes in and gets wickets, and makes it easier for everyone else around him. It's not really helping, other than the fact that Trent Boult is just an outrageously good bowler, and I'd suggest our most important player going into the World Cup, because the fact we've got Williamson and Taylor means that each one of them isn't quite as what's the word? Well, just like crucial to the team as Trent Boult is, because if you take Trent Boult out of that bowling lineup, very, very different looking story. That's kind of my main focus though on this, because of the fringes of the squad have become so like cloudy, and I mean, dudes not playing when they should be, and then if you're not going to play them now, and then the idea, I know a couple commentators chucked this out about Todd Astle actually. They said it's almost like protecting him so he can't play his way out of the team, but I'm sort of looking at this as he's got to play his way into the team, so I'm confused about that. And if you're not going to pick him for these games, how are you going to trust him if, say, Santner gets injured in a World Cup semi-final? I don't understand that. If you don't trust him to play at home against Bangladesh, then surely you don't trust him to come in at a World Cup when those 10 overs could be the difference between making it through to a final or not. But I think the main takeaway, therefore, that I've got from that is that we do have a lovely core of dependable, reliable veterans in that team. And Trent Boult, Kane Williamson, and Ross Taylor. Potentially chuck someone like Tim Southee in there as well. I still think Tim Southee's in our best 11 ODI bowlers, even though he's been pretty trash for about 4 years. I tell you what, I got a stat on Tim Southee, because his game against third ODI against Bangladesh, got a bunch of wickets. It was 4 years to the exact day of his 7 for 33 against England at the World Cup. In those 4 years in between, he had not taken more than 3 wickets in ODI a single time. And the funny thing is, he's played a couple other games on February the 20th as well, taken a few wickets. All up on February 20th of any given year, Tim Southee has taken 17 wickets at an average of 9.7 in ODI cricket. Every other day of the year, averages about 36 something, I think. So I don't know about you, but that's just a stat that's completely outrageous and confusing to me. But I love it. I love it. I love the fact that this one random day Tim Southee is just the greatest bowler of all time. But yeah, I think we're going to be depending a lot on those key players as always, don't you reckon? They're the guys who are going to have to be the ones who like carry us in the World Cup, regardless of who the 10th and 11th man are.
That is the major problem, though, because those guys will not be carrying you to
I forgot
a
to say
World
Martin
Cup
Guptill
final.
as well. He's in that.
Yeah, Guppy, yeah, Gup. Those guys, would you chuck Tom Latham in there? Like, would you chuck Tom
Since
Latham
he's
in
keeping, yeah, I think you'd have to.
Right. So even if you add, so you got Guppy, Williamson, Taylor, Latham, Southee, and Bolt. That's 6 guys.
Yep.
6 guys, and we'll settle with 3 genuine world-class. I'm not quite as world-classy about Martin Guptill, just based on his record overseas compared to his record in Aotearoa.
He's a little bit of a flat track bully at times.
Yeah, bit of a large disparity there, so I'm not going to chuck him in the world-class bucket that Williamson and Taylor in. Like, that's a super high bar, and we know that Ross Taylor is averaging 71 since the start of 2017. Mind-blowing numbers there.
Yeah,
from
could you
Ross
just say
Taylor.
that again?
71. Oh, that's 71. Actually 70.98, but we'll do some rounding in benefit to the great Ross Taylor.
He must have had a leg bye he didn't get credited with at some point, which would have taken him up.
Oh, for
Close
sure.
enough.
That gives me an idea for some more trivial questions that we can finish with. But my idea here is that having 3 world-class players is not going to win you a World Cup. It's probably not going to get you to a World Cup final. Having 6 players who are dependable is not going to get you to a World Cup final. And that's the issue here, is that because of all the confusion around those fringe players, those guys who may be in the team, may not be in the team, and I think it's safe to say at this point we've still got, 5 or 6, definitely not 6 because then you've got 12 players, but maybe 4 or 5 players who we simply, like, you can go to any person in New Zealand and they're going to have a different opinion on who those 5 players are. And that uncertainty does not fill me with any confidence that those players are going to be able to perform at a World Cup, which is, like, when you look around the other nations around the world, or even the Blackcaps team from the last World Cup, those role players, they need to be executing a role over a long period of time in preparation for a World Cup. They need to know what their role is, how to execute their role, and have a period of time leading into the World Cup where they can work through the difficulties that they are going to face at the World Cup. The quintessential role player from the last World Cup was Grant Elliott. And he had been doing a similar role leading into the World Cup. Like, everyone knew what Grant Elliott was there for. Whereas there's so much uncertainty leading into this World Cup that it's like, what are those other guys going to do? Because they're all going to have to do something at some point to get us anywhere near a World Cup final. And I don't understand the stuff like Trent Boult playing, I think, 9 out of 10 ODIs this summer.
Yeah, it was something like that.
He only missed 1 versus Sri Lanka. He played all 3 ODIs versus Bangladesh. What is the point in that? There's nothing. Even if it's just strictly preparing for the Test series and giving Trent Boult a bit of time off for the Test series, let alone a Test series and then a World Cup. Like, all of this stuff is very weird, and it's weird, which is concerning, because it's the same weirdness we've had to deal with in terms of Gavin Larsen and Mike Hesson.
Yeah, it's exactly the same kind of weirdness, isn't it? Because at the point you've made a couple times in your lovely writings is that this is very much the vibe we took into the Champions Trophy, wasn't it? Which was an absolute bloody disaster. And beforehand, they had a warm-up tournament where they just ran with a bunch of fringe guys, see who could play their way in. And then they went and picked, like, Adam Milne out of the IPL instead. And it's just, I mean, that was just they set themselves up for failure there, and it was going back a long way further than that, because you look at the 2015 World Cup, we knew exactly what our top 11 was. And that top 11, well, with one difference, the one difference being, like, that third seamer, where we started with McClenaghan, he got injured, and came Adam Milne, he got injured, and came, I think Matt Henry played the semi in the final, didn't he? So, close enough, those guys all just did the same role, and that was the point. They had a role. Brendan McCullum was opening at the top to give a bit of a tonk and get things started. Guptill was the guy who was going to bat for the bulk of 40 to 50 overs if he could and score a big 100. Williamson and Taylor do what they do. Brian Elliott and Corey Anderson, the links in the middle. I remember that semi-final where those two had a big partnership to save things. Like, everyone just had a job. They knew exactly what they were doing. And that goes for the batting lineup, the bowling lineup. It was just, everything was so sorted. And I really, like, in hindsight, there must have just been 90% Brendan McCullum, eh? Like, just him having such a like, firm sense of what he wanted out of a cricket team and what his players, what their strengths were, allowing them to play to their strengths. And right now, I don't think we've got a whole lot of that. How are you feeling about Gary Stead at the moment?
Well, just that is the kind of overarching idea to finish with. I just want to, on the Brendan McCullum thing, you said Brendan McCullum, his role was, like, he had a clear role as a batsman, strictly as a batsman in that team.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked a lot about Colin Munro. I've
right.
expressed my full opinions about Colin Munro. Colin Munro is in no way, shape or form half of what Brendan McCullum is or was. But as a symptom of this uncertainty, we have seen, like, a wavering, a little fragility in the faith shown in Colin Munro to execute that role. If we were living in a better kind of selection idea world, they would just be coming out and saying, Colin Munro, you're the guy for the World Cup. Fuck the haters. You do what you do. We know what to expect from you. We know how you bat. And we are happy to accept the risks it takes for you to bat. Instead, Colin Munro's been in and out. We don't even know what our opening pair's going to be. It might be Henry Nicholls. It might be Colin Munro. Who the fuck knows? No one knows.
The fact that they brought Munro back for one game was very, very confusing, and just one more of these symptoms, wasn't it? Like, if you're going to commit to Henry Nicholls, sweet as, but let him have a good run in the... Like, they gave Munro a good run, and the problem, I mean, he had a couple problems. He had the problem with the fact that they didn't seem to be sure whether or not, as you're just saying, that they could trust him with this, like, blistering opening thing. But he also had the problem in that he, even when he was trying to do that, he wasn't doing it very well. But Nicholls, surely then if you're going to make that change, you make that change. Like, make a decisive change and leave Nicholls in for the rest of it. And keep Munro in the squad if you want, but maybe bat him at 6, see what he's like in that closer role. If you can have him and Jimmy Neesham coming in, okay, that's a different story. You have to drop, like, de Grandhomme or something, but I don't know. At least, like, try things, because if Munro's going to go to the World Cup, and I suspect he will, because I don't think there's another batsman out there who's even, like, putting their hand up for this, because it's just a bit too late. Will Young's the next cab off the rank, obviously, but, like, he's never played an ODI before, at least not that I can remember. So it's too late for that. You're going to have to take Munro as the backup batsman or as the opener. Well, if you have him as the backup batsman, he's going to have to fill in anywhere between 1 and 6, because that's what the backup batsman has to do. Henry Nicholls can do that. We've seen Henry Nicholls bat as an opener and bat all the way down to 6, so he's not so much of a problem there. So maybe you do end up having to go with Munro as the opener at the World Cup, in which case, why would you drop him? What's going on?
Well, even for the last Bangladesh ODI, you've won the series 2-0. Just take the piss, have Colin Munro bat at number 3 and leave Henry Nicholls to open.
And give Trent Boult a goddamn rest.
Like, why does Henry Nicholls, who is being touted as our future opener for the World Cup, a possibility because Colin Munro didn't take his chances, then you put Henry Nicholls in at number 3? Like, all of this stuff, is very confusing wildcard, and I would just rather think about Ross Taylor.
Well, this is why I asked about Gary Stead, because he started so well. You know, he had that big win in the Test Series win in the UAE, and now we're seeing like a different side of his leadership, which is perhaps not ideal this close to a World Cup. I'll just say that much.
Well, see, yeah, this is the thing. I think Gary Stead has about 10% power.
Yeah, I could see that.
I think his role right now, as a fresh Blackcaps coach, is to run the net sessions, help players upskill themselves, help them get better, and do a couple of game plans and tactics and research and stuff like that. I'm not convinced Gary Stead has a whole lot of say in A, how the squads are selected, and B, how the teams are selected, because I reckon Gavin Larsen is just running the show, and he is, because the trends are the same. Nothing has changed in terms of how the squads are selected and how the team is rest in rotation, how different players are utilized, how consistency does not exist in any way, shape or form other than Trent Boult playing 9 out of 10 ODIs when he doesn't have to. Like, all the same stuff that annoyed us about Gavin Larsen and Mike Hesson, which could have just been Gavin Larsen, based on what we now know, or based on what we now think, but we'll settle with the lesson regime. All that stuff appears to be very evident now. Nothing appears to have changed, despite a new coach, which makes one think that Gavin Larsen is pulling the strings, and he's pulling them even harder because you've got someone who is new to the job, and so he thinks or he believes that it's best for him just to up the ante in terms of his power in selections and how the team is selected as well as the squads leading up to it, because you kind of think the chief selector guy, he is just in charge of selecting the players for the squads. Whereas what we've seen is that despite Mike Hesson leaving, the same selection issues mid-series, game to game, the same issues there are still in place, which makes me think that Gavin Larsen is having a say in how teams are selected as well as squads.
The funny thing with that is that, like, when Brendan McCullum was in charge, it felt like Brendan McCullum's team from top to tail. Like, it was just, he seemed to have his fingerprints on everything that they did. Even like Mike Hesson. When Mike Hesson was hired, it was like, oh, this is Brendan McCullum's Otago buddy. He's got his fella in there. And it's also funny to remember that there was a time when Brendan McCullum wasn't, the beloved Kiwi character that he is these days. There was a time when he was actually like quite... there's a little bit of hostility towards him from the general public, around that time. There was the old thing where he took over the captaincy from Taylor and what appeared to be a little bit of a coup, and then he put his own fella in as coach, all that. It seemed like McCullum was the ones who pulled the strings then, and I always got the feeling that Hesson was always in control when it was Hesson and Larsen equals lesson, but even if it wasn't, it was still Hesson had enabled Gavin Larsen in that way, in the same way that McCullum had enabled Hesson in a way, and then McCullum left, Hesson takes over, Hesson leaves, Larsen takes over, and if that is the trend in that way, maybe it's not, but if that is the trend, then you're sort of seeing the power structures drift further and further away from the team, which is kind of perhaps a telling circumstance, isn't it? Like, what do you think? Captain to coach to selector, where I don't even know why you need a selector. I don't see why the coach and captain can't. I understand why the captain needs a bit of distance because he's got to work with the lads, and maybe it helps to have a selection panel in terms of just like making sure everyone's getting the scouting up to date and whatever like that. But just to have one, I just don't understand that thing where Gavin Larsen seems to have this like sword wielding power when he's not technically a part of the group. It's a bit odd to me. It's a lot odd. It's completely odd.
I'll wrap up my kind of cynical thoughts with this wildcard. the White Ferns are heavily underperforming at the moment. The White Ferns are reasonably terrible against England, India, Australia, and then they are very competitive against the likes of Pakistan, West Indies, South Africa, which is alright, it's solid, but given the players they have, they should be competing at a high level in women's cricket. They got smoked by India. They were reasonably crappy at the World T20 before that. Now they play in the Rose Bowl against Australia, and that is the Friday, the first game, so probably by the time this is out online, and they will probably lose the Rose Bowl. They might rally and get a win there. Haiti Tiffin has been ousted pretty much as the coach because they have been underperforming, and the White Ferns is just a bit of a shambles at the moment. The Blackcaps were a shambles at the Champions Trophy and could be a shambles of some extent at the World Cup.
Yeah, a bit nervous for that one.
Which doesn't reflect very positively on New Zealand cricket. And that is a narrative to keep an eye on. Obviously, we would love it if the White Ferns just came out and smoked Australia and turned a corner. And we'd love it if the Blackcaps just rallied as true underdogs, dark horses of the World Cup, and won the World Cup or made it to the final, which they can do if everything goes well. They have serious dark horse underdog potential. But against countering that, you've got the very strong possibility that everything is a big pile of shit, and after the World Cup, the last World Cup, the Men's World Cup, everything was honky-dory. New Zealand cricket was a lovely place to be in, whereas right now, if things go down the shitty route, we could be looking at a New Zealand cricket organisation that needs a serious revamp of how they operate, strictly based on the results and the issues around the two teams, because they have not been performing at major tournaments and around the world as well in various formats. So it's an idea to keep an eye on as we move to and throughout the World Cup. Wildcard. Is Ross Taylor the greatest Kiwi batsman ever?
In ODIs, yes. In Test matches, probably not. In terms of overall, I think I'd still lean for Test matches over ODIs as being the deciding factor, and therefore I'd say he is... It's tricky, because you got to compare to like guys from way back in the day, and I am a bit of a merchant for some of the old history, so I always like to chuck in names like Bert Sutcliffe and old mate Donnelly, but other than that, I think you've got Crowe, Williamson, and Taylor, don't you? And I would say Taylor is probably third in that trio, but it's basically like a first equal the whole way across.
Yeah, it's an impossible discussion to have, obviously, with the timelines, but especially because I think my factor in Taylor being my favourite Kiwi batsman of all time and my personal greatest batsman of all time is his T20 work. So obviously Martin Crowe didn't play T20, so it's a discussion.
He did have the old Cricket Max though. You remember
he
that one?
He started Cricket Max, so that's worth
it was his baby.
That's almost as much as worth as much as Taylor's like performances in T20. The fact that Ross Taylor is an absolute beast. He's been incredibly resurgent in T20 cricket ever since you wrote about his mysterious absence in T20 cricket for the Blackcaps. So he's performing at an extremely high level in all three formats. Yeah, Test cricket is a bit lower perhaps than the other formats, but he's still a world-class batsman in the Test arena. It's for me, it's just an amazing time to be a Ross Taylor fan, and like as you said, the whole captaincy saga. We've had to deal with stuff like, Ross Taylor slog sweeps too much, so he's got to put the slog sweep away. Everything has kind of been a little bit against Ross Taylor. Everything's been, there's something wrong with. There's always something wrong with Ross Taylor.
Well, he had the eye thing for one.
Yeah, he had the eye thing as well. So whether it's manufactured by other people or whether it's something like the eye thing, it's been a rough road for Ross Taylor to get to this point. But we are in the midst of just one of the greatest Kiwi sporting runs of any sport, any gender, whatever boundaries you want to put on it. It's just one of the best Kiwi sporting things that, I've witnessed in my lifetime is Ross Taylor scoring runs in all three formats at a truly ridiculous level.
He did give the old like on Facebook for that 2020 article back in the day too, so I'd like to claim a little bit of credit. He's done alright for a fella on a diet of KFC and red wine, eh?
Sure is.
I guess that's a lesson for us all. Except for the KFC, but I don't think I'm going to be able to stomach that.
Hey, it's all protein.
Yeah, it's all protein. and chicken grease. We've
obviously got Blackcaps Test cricket. We will wrap this ODI series wrap up in a jiffy. So we'll be talking about Blackcaps Test cricket throughout the Test series. But we do have a Wellington Phoenix podcast, which might have to be intertwined with a little bit of discussion, maybe in the following episode, about the New Zealand Breakers, because you've just written about their struggles as at the moment as well.
Yeah, I'd be just as happy to put the old Breakers in the back room and throw away the key for a couple months until they come back. But we could do that. We could do a bit of a debrief.
Well, give us a Wellington Phoenix tease to lead us into the next episode of the Niche Cast, and we'll wrap this bad boy up. So just give us a hard and fast something or rather about your Wellington Phoenix thoughts.
Yeah, right. I got one of those. So start of the season, they got things underway with a nice little win over the Newcastle Jets, and then went 4 games without scoring a goal and looked a bit terrible. And then all of a sudden they had just this blistering half against Sydney FC over in Sydney. Won 3-1, scored 3 goals in the first half. It was pretty much the best 45 minutes the team's played in like years and years. Kick-started their whole season. They went on a big gold unbeaten streak for, what did it get to, 8 or 9 games or something like that. And then they came up against Sydney again in Wellington. Lost that 1-0. I think it was Roy Krishna missed a penalty towards the end as well. One of a couple late penalties he's missed this season, actually. And then, and there goes the unbeaten streak. Next, we've seen a nice little run where they've been competitive, where they've looked solid, but they haven't quite been as sort of demonstrably overperforming or just getting the results, because I think they're playing quite well. It's not so much the performance levels. It's just they haven't been able to turn their dominance into goals often enough when they've had those spells, especially in first halves, because they're quite a quick starting team, where they just need to put a couple more in the back of the net at those times. So so they then had this run leading up to the present day where they've been drawing a lot of games. And games that they could be winning, games that maybe they could just as easily be losing, but a team that wants to finish in the top 4 and get a home semi-final, it would be nice if they were, getting 3 points rather than 1 a few more times. And this weekend they have a game over in Sydney. It's a home game, but they're playing in Campbelltown for some stupid reason that I can't even fathom, against Sydney FC. So the first time they played Sydney FC was a big turning point in their season. The second time they played Sydney FC was a big turning point in their season. And who have they got this weekend? Sydney FC on Saturday night.
Safe to say that it's going to be another turning point in their season.
Yeah, but which way?
Ooh.
Hopefully upwards.
That is the definition of a little cliffhanger for the next episode of the Niche Cast. Kia kaha, beautiful fans, supporters, listeners of the Niche Cast, and all you people who can read good around Aotearoa for reading the content on the Niche Case. We will be back most likely early next week, around Monday, with the next episode focusing on the Wellington Phoenix. Kia kaha e tū. Ciao.